Today we're going to discuss rounding to the nearest hundred. But to help us understand rounding those bigger numbers, let's talk about rounding smaller numbers first. First, let's talk about rounding to the nearest 10. When rounding to the nearest 10, it's important to remember what number is halfway between 0 and 10. The answer is 5. 5 is the halfway point between 0 and 10. 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 all round up to the larger 10. And numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 round down to the smaller 10. Now let's quickly talk about rounding to the nearest 100. When rounding to the nearest 100, it's important to remember that the number that has a 5 in the tens place and a 0 in the ones place, which is a 50, is directly between the smaller multiple of 100 and the larger multiple of 100. Numbers that are 50 and larger round up to the larger 100. Numbers that have a 1 in the tens place, a 2 in the tens place, a 3 in the tens place, or a 4 in the tens place will round down to the smaller 100. This small strip here only shows multiples of 10, but let's look more closely at numbers 40 to 60 to show you which numbers actually round down and which ones round up. As we've mentioned before, numbers that are 50 or larger will round up to 100. If the number is between 49 and 100, it will round up. 49 is the cutoff spot for rounding down, or back to the smaller multiple of 100 when rounding to the nearest 100. So, any number that is 49 or smaller rounds down. Another way to say that is, if a number is between 0 and 50, that number will round down to the smaller multiple of 100. The example that you've been shown has 0 as the smaller multiple of 100 and 100 as the larger multiple of 100. But you can round any number, no matter how large or small, to the nearest 100. This graphic will help us show that. Just like before, our answers are in the columns to the far left and the far right. Multiples of 100 have at least 2 zeros in them, and they must have a 0 in the ones place and a 0 in the tens place. When a number ends with 50, or has a 5 in the tens place and a 0 in the ones place, that means that it is directly between two multiples of 100. It is the halfway point. If a number is at that halfway point or larger, it rounds up to the larger multiple of 100. Now, 49 is the cutoff spot for rounding down to the smaller multiple of 100. So if a number is 49, 149, 249, 349, 449, and so on, it will round back down to the smaller multiple of 100. If we look at numbers 10, 360, 550, 620, and 880, we can show that the numbers that have a 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the tens place round down to the smaller multiple of 100, and the numbers that have a 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 round up to the larger multiple of 100. And the reason is they're actually just closer to those multiples of 100. When rounding a number like 3,780, you need to decide which two multiples of 100 your number could be rounded to. Your possibilities for this number are 3,700 or 3,800. Our original number has an 8 in the tens place and a 0 in the ones place. So, essentially, we need to decide if 80 is closer to 0, or 80 would round up because it's closer to a larger 100. When I use a number line from 0 to 100 and I estimate where 80 is upon that number line, I can see that 80 is closer to 100 than 0. So it will round upward. So we know that 780 is closer to 800 than 700. 3,780 rounded to the nearest hundred is 3,800. 8,203 is 3 numbers away from the smaller multiple of 100, and 97 numbers away from a larger multiple of 100. Being that that number is closer to the smaller multiple of 100, it rounds down to 8,200. 12,448 is between 12,400 and 12,500. Remember, 49 is the cutoff spot for rounding down, and 48 is smaller than 49, so it will still round downward to 12,400. So far we've talked about rounding to different place values. You use the ones to determine where to round to the nearest 10. You use the tens to determine where to round for the nearest 100. And you use the hundreds place to determine how to round to the nearest thousands place, which we will discuss in our next lesson. Rounding to the nearest 100. Telling which multiple of 100 is the closest. Rounding to the nearest 100. Telling which multiple of 100 is the closest. Rounding to the nearest 100.